Hi, this is Ben Llewellyn, and today I'm talking about one of the Welsh language's greatest novels, probably the best overall rated of the 20th century, and I'll explain why in a minute. First of all, what is it? Cysgod y Cryman, and I'll just explain what this means in Welsh. Cysgod is shadow, related to the word sleep, cwsg, and y Cryman means the sickle, related to cwrwm, round. Cysgod y Cryman, the shadow of the sickle, and this refers to the communist era, and this is set just after the Second World War, when there was a real kind of Red Scare happening in Western society. And this book is different from a lot of other Welsh novels because it spans two diametrically opposed periods, and it's the first novel I can sort of say that's truly modern in a of its time sense. Now, there have been other efforts and other noteworthy ones, but this is the first that combines that with the language that it has in it. The sentences are they're shortened than what was going on at the time. They're moving forward in terms of language. It's definitely a break from the more chapel, religious-based language, though that has influence upon it. So what is the novel about? Written in 1953, this is about a son, Vaughan, who is going to university, and his father, Edward Vaughan, who is a wealthy and respected landowner in his community from the old Welsh liberal tradition. Though I need to express that he's portrayed in a very non-liberal way rather than liberal. He's presented almost like a Tory, that says more about the author. However, this is about his son going to university and falling in love with a woman named Gwylan, and she is the main protagonist of him being introduced to communism and Marxism, and him leaving his non-conformist religion and turning away from his father's lifestyle and his basically his inheritance, and choosing, rather than to finish his degree, to be a common labourer for the council and to try and turn his heritage into a cooperative, basically. This is quite radical at the time. Welsh culture was still very chapel-based, and so the idea of a young man refusing that background and then going into Marxism and then being the main focal point and hero of a novel would have been quite strange at the time. However, the idea that he's heroic and charismatic, which is portrayed in some Welsh dramas today, or has been, strikes me as a bit odd, because heroic and charismatic are the last words that would come to mind when discussing Vaughan. This character comes across through the novel as ungrateful, whinging, pious, self-righteous, a bit pathetic, showing deep ingratitude for all that he's been given, a university education, being the son of a landed, wealthy gentleman respected in local politics, with a long history of owning your land and being at the top of the hierarchy in your community, and the son just turns from that and shows no gratitude for it whatsoever, and it boggles the mind. And to try and say that he's the hero of this novel is quite strange for me. The hero of the novel for me would be his father, actually, Edward Vaughan, which when I read the novel I was cheering for his father through the story, because I thought, alright, when's he gonna snap and put this ungrateful little whelp in his place and sort things out and save the family? But it doesn't go that way. One thing that is definitely good about the novel is that it's a story, clearly, with a beginning, middle, and end, and there's none of this playing around with structure and stuff. It's a clear, coherent story, as you would expect in the 1950s. Novels of that time, including Welsh, tend to be very stable in their structure and clear to read. So if you are beginning in Welsh, I'm going to say that the language of this is simple. It's a good novel for someone who has intermediate Welsh. It's consistent and it doesn't use too many extravagant words. He made an effort, obviously, to slim down the language of the period. There's influences of the old nonconformist language in it, but it's definitely, in many ways, a rebellion against it. Which strikes me as well, another thing that's so unique about this novel, it is rebellious against its own tradition. You have descriptions of succulent lips of lovers, and the way he describes women is very, in minor cases, quite erotic, which is deeply shifting from what had come before. It appeals intentionally to a younger audience rather than the established reader base of Welsh society at the time, which again is a shift, and that's why it's so different and so probably well respected across so many decades. And also, it's exactly in the center of the 20th century. It's describing the contention between two generations. So you don't just have Harry Vaughan, you have his sister Greta, and you have his mother. And she's ill through this as well. And there's an English doctor who is helping treat the mother, and the father wants to allow his advances onto his daughter because of that treatment. But she is in love with one of the farmhands, Karl, who is a German. This is not within her class, and the father clearly wants her to marry within a certain class. However, there's a cultural difference here. The doctor is English and they are Welsh-speaking Welsh. And Iselin Ellis, that's the name of the author, he conveys the difference in culture between Welsh and English in Powys and Northeast Wales very well, because there's something that happens when Welsh people speak English, especially Welsh speakers, but also non-Welsh speakers, is that yes, there's an accent difference, but they use different words and in different ways. The language of the English doctor is a bit stiff, not just in terms of that professional category. It's conveying a placid nature, whereas the Welsh characters, when they're speaking English in those dialogues, are still very attuned to their own culture. And it's not softer. That's the wrong way to describe Welsh culture in English. It's a bit rounded and less abrupt than the English culture. And Iselin Ellis is very attuned to that in his description. And also the fact that she's having to choose or being forced to choose between a German and an Englishman is quite unique, especially at the time. And that the German, Karl, has come in and speaks fluent Welsh. It says a lot about the society, that immigrants are coming into Wales, and it's fine. It's almost expected that they're going to learn Welsh, but they're not expecting the English to learn Welsh. And there's a barrier there that's made aware of, that the Englishman in this novel is an outsider, but the German who learned Welsh is not, and that it's an expression of the author's political views as well. World War II had just ended, and there's quite vivid racism in this novel toward the German. I would say that there's glimpses of other forms of racism, but you have to remember it is the period. The novel was written in the early 1950s, set in the late 1940s, so that was common in the period, and I'm not judging the existence of it in that time, because that's just a reflection of what society was. It's able to convey that honestly. There's a scene where Karl is beat up quite physically, and you see Greta, especially from this point, deeply more attached to the German, and the English doctor is set aside as very removed from this group in their relations. And the fact that she's sort of being forced into a marriage with him because of him treating his mother and the wanting to convey gratitude is very explicit. It may seem very odd to us today, but that was the society of the time. However, the son, him going into communism, it shows this, both of these two characters, Greta and Harry Vaughan, were conveying some kind of social justice narrative in reaction to the old establishment, because the daughter, Greta, was attaching herself to a German just after the war, which is an expression of wanting this solidarity or peace globally. There's nothing wrong with wanting peace globally. It's just the way that it's conveyed is stereotyped to us today, perhaps. And Harry's being absorbed into communism, and that itself may seem childish today, Marxism, but at the time it was very real, and some people did see it as the future. And it's presented to him, and it's presented in the novel. The language that Focalus uses is a religious kind of knowledge when he's discussing communism, especially one scene toward the end when it's talking about the, how do I say it in English, Willedigaeth Latin. So it's Harry had a conversion to a common people's vision. It's conveying this Marxism as some type of higher form of faith. It's quite strange to us today, but that's how many people saw it in the period, and it's very honest. I appreciate that. Now, I said that I was rooting for the father. That's because the son, when he goes to university, he's seen as quite needy of this woman Gwylan, who introduces communism to him more in depth, and his growing affiliations with ideas. And I wanted the father to just give him a smack and tell him how the world is, but he doesn't do that. It doesn't end that way. And you see the son at university, and he's complaining about it. And the irony is that I went to Bangor University, and the son is at Bangor University, and I was very grateful for what I had, not having been able to obtain university in America, and to have had one of the first true novels of this depth that I read show a character that was ungrateful for that. And the fact that I come from a semi-broken family and have this character ungrateful for deep roots, a landed semi-gentry aristocracy lineage, it was difficult for me to absorb a character who was ungrateful for all those things that I could have not hoped for in my wildest dreams. And it was like the author was trying to present this person as a hero, and I kept trying to understand in the novel, what was he the hero of? What was he overcoming? And toward the end, you begin to see the father as a liberal, but he's presented, I hinted at it earlier, but he's presented as if he's a conservative, and it shows a bit of confusion, I think, on the part of the author, because liberalism and conservatism are very different things. And he's labeled as liberal, but he's behaving as a Tory. And both are fine. It's just there's a bit of ambiguity as to whether Iselin Focalus understands the differences between liberalism and conservatism in the novel. Now, I mentioned ingratitude, which I see as the defining trait of the main character in the novel. And he refuses the religion of his ancestor, the nonconformist religion, and kind of embraces this Marxist faith that he projects as, in a mystical sense almost. So I mentioned Greta, and her defining trait in this is that she's choosing between two international visions, one of social justice with the German and the other of forced into wedlock with the Englishman. And that's quite a metaphor for Wales in the period, especially from the point of view of Iselin Focalus, the author, and especially noting that Wales did not have any self-government yet, 45 years before Wales would vote to have its own assembly and then Senedd later. So the vision of what Wales was being projected through Harry's sister Greta. And then the fact that his mother is sick conveys in a way that he's not having love from the older generation, and he's having to again, project that outward, and the women that he is attracted to are visions of him trying to build a new community that's in opposition to the world of his parents. The irony is that Gwyllon, the communist woman, rejects him, and then he goes for a kind of a lower class girl, and he wants to then become a laborer for the council, which is, I mean, it's mind-boggling that you would classify this person as a hero, because what he's doing is he's refusing all that his family are giving him for some sense of self-righteousness, and it whinges through the novel. It seeps an obsessive moral piety, which forces me to, I like all the other characters, especially the German Karl. I think that his character is, as an immigrant who's learned Welsh, I'm very fond of that a German has learned Welsh. And it's the way he describes him in the novel is very peculiar. He has a definite personality that he fleshes up, which is very good. I should also note the descriptions of plants and grass and brigs of the tops of trees and stuff in this novel they're very kuta, brief, but they encapsulate a lot. It's very concise. I would say that the language is very concise. But back to the main character, he refuses all that his father's given him, and this ingratitude forced me increasingly through the novel to say, well, this guy, written by a Welsh nationalist, Islwyn Guy Fawkes, sorry, that's another guy, Islwyn Fawkes Ellis, he's supposed to represent some kind of embodiment of the Wales to come, and I found myself saying, no, well, if this is the Wales you want, I would rather go with the archetype Tory liberal father here and refuse that and join that side of the camp. And so in the novel there's an election towards the end, and I found myself rooting against the hero of the novel. I didn't want this plaintive ingratitude to win. But there's hinting and hope of the old world at the end, but it is definitely that two generations are diametrically opposed, and it increasingly aligns to the novel, and that adds a clarity that I think is missing certainly in a lot of the postmodern rubbish that was written later. And if you're looking for a clear, easy to read novel, an obvious storyline, not messing around with structure, that you just want to read a story, this is a really good one to read, which is what I would want from a novel if I was reading a novel, right? Hey, if you enjoyed this book review, let me know and I'll do more like it at some point. And as always, diolch yn fawr yn fawr. Thank you very much for watching. We will see you in the next episode. Don't forget to hit that like button. Thanks.